An inquiry that's cut right to the heart of trust in the public service.
It is worrying for what this means for the whole public service.
Stats NZ has come in for a hiding over failing to safeguard census data.
We have to be assured it cannot and will not happen again.
Is the Electoral Commission next in the government's crosshairs?
All options are on the table.
Kia ora, ko Giles Dexter aho, ane te purongo tōrangapu mō tēnei wiki. Welcome to Focus on Politics. The Public Service Commission's report into agencies' handling of personal information has been a long time coming. It was all sparked by allegations from whistleblowers in the Post and Sunday Star Times that census and COVID vaccination data collected at Manurewa Marae was being used to help Te Pāti Māori with its election campaign. Last June, the Prime Minister asked for an inquiry. It was delayed again and again and again, until Tuesday. The inquiry wasn't tasked with finding if the data was actually misused, but if government agencies had the right safeguards in place to prevent even the slightest chance it could be. In short, no. The Public Service Commissioner, Sir Brian Roach, not even 4 months into the job, did not mince his words.
The public service has a duty to protect the personal information of New Zealanders. That is a non-negotiable value. This inquiry has found some agencies failed in their responsibility to protect and manage the sharing of personal information. While we don't know if personal information was improperly used, the opportunity was left open, which is unacceptable. As I've said, it will be for other authorities with the appropriate regulatory and investigative tools to determine whether personal data was misused. Regardless of what those authorities find, New Zealanders rightfully expect government agencies will protect and manage their personal information, and that didn't happen, which is unacceptable. In my view, the report makes for very sobering reading. It raises a number of issues that go to the core of the confidence and trust required to maintain the integrity and sanctity of information entrusted to government agencies. The system has failed, and that isn't acceptable, and it must be and will be remedied.
The 74-page report paints a picture of government agencies that, in desperate times, skipped over some fundamental processes, one agency in particular. In 2023, Stats NZ contracted to Poumatakana, now known as the Whānau Order Commissioning Agency, in a last-ditch attempt to boost Māori census responses. In turn, Te Poumatakana subcontracted Manurewa Marae. In a way, it was a success. The work collected 40,000 extra census forms from Māori. But in the rush to get it done, Stats NZ applied a high-trust model, abandoning some fundamental confidentiality protections like a certificate of confidentiality. Concerns about the process were raised internally. Stats NZ did nothing about it. Michael Heron KC, who co-led the inquiry, says it left the potential for information to be mishandled wide open.
The conflict of interest terms in the contract only considered conflicts arising from Te Poumatakana. It didn't expressly provide for conflicts arising from subcontractors such as Manurewa Marae. That risk was raised early in the process by a Stats employee. But in any event, neither party to the contract seems to have considered the conflicts of interest provisions, and possible conflicting interests were not identified or managed. We find the aim of the Stats contract with Te Poumatakana was well-intentioned, and the resulting additional census forms meant that Stats considered the contract was successful. However, the Stats processes meant there was a risk of the mishandling of personal information which was not addressed, and as a result there was a risk of the collection or use of personal information for an improper purpose.
The Ministry of Health and Health New Zealand, while less at fault, did not escape criticism. During the race to get vulnerable Māori communities vaccinated against COVID-19, the ministry supplied personal health information to the service providers. But there were no conflict of interest safeguards or even any controls on what happened to that information once it was handed over. Again, it boiled down to a hands-off, high-trust approach which left the gate open. Here's the other co-leader of the inquiry, Panya Gray.
The Ministry of Health and then Te Whatu Ora entered into a number of data sharing agreements, or DSAs, with Te Pou Matakana. In short, we were satisfied that the terms of those DSAs laid strong foundations for the protection of personal health information, shared for COVID-19 vaccination purposes. While the front-end safeguards were adequate and appropriate, the back-end safeguards were lacking. There was limited checking that those foundation safeguards were being met, and we found that there was a lack of controls once the data was downloaded by providers. Further, neither the Ministry of Health nor Te Whatu Ora have a facility to audit the provider's use of the data. This meant that the parties relied on trust that the DSA terms were being complied with. We do not consider this to be appropriate.
All in all, it was, according to the Commissioner, a report with far-reaching consequences for the entire public service.
I think it is a massive wake-up call, and it's on the verge of the digitisation of services and greater use of technology. There has to be a non-negotiable sense of confidence the public must have in us as the public service. And this has shown a systemic failure in one agency. That is one agency too many.
It was enough for the Chief Executive of Stats NZ to fall on his sword and not seek reappointment. Whether Mark Sowden willingly walked the plank or was pushed, Sir Brian Roach demurred, but it's an early sign of his expectations.
We had a number of discussions. He reached a decision which, as I said earlier, I think is the right decision, and it's one that I respect.
Did you encourage him to by himself, or with your encouragement?
Look, I'm not going to go into the details of an employment matter, but I think we've reached the right outcome here, and I think it does send a signal that there is a threshold beyond which public servants have to actually be careful.
The Prime Minister's pretty pleased at the Commissioner's approach. After all, the government made a big deal about efficiencies in the public service, and this inquiry has left an enormous dent.
I was shocked, and it was totally unacceptable because it gets to the heart of public trust in the public service. If your data cannot be looked after, if the money and taxpayer money is not well managed, we've ended up in the situation that we have. Importantly, the PSC has taken accountability for it and is going to drive accountability in the system. I want to see accountability from the top around CEOs, making sure that processes are being followed and their organisations are being well managed. We need to make sure that protocols around data being managed is everywhere across the system, and equally need to make sure things like conflicts of interest around awarding contracts and other things is well managed as well.
Chris Hipkins, similarly alarmed.
Around the world, we've seen citizens in many different countries, including in New Zealand, more reluctant to participate in processes like the census, and I think this sort of finding will only exacerbate that problem. I think agencies like Stats New Zealand need to be scrupulous in making sure they've got safeguards in place, because public confidence is vital to the integrity of the census process.
The report makes a number of recommendations. The Ministry of Justice will look at law changes around financial incentives to switch electoral rolls. Centring around whistleblower allegations, visitors to the marae were offered vouchers if they switched roles. The Public Service Commission's Conflicts of Interest model and Information Sharing Agreement guidance has also been given an update. And Stats NZ, the Ministry of Health, Health New Zealand and Te Puni Kokiri have been told not to enter into any new contracts or renew or extend existing ones with the Marae, the Waiperera Trust and the Whānau Ora Commissioning Agency until the Commission has satisfied the agency's contracts adequately deal with information sharing and conflict of interest obligations. Whether the data was actually misused is now up for police and the Office of the Privacy Commissioner to investigate. John Tamahiri, Chief Executive of Waiperera and the Whānau Ora Commissioning Agency, as well as President of Te Pāti Māori, asked police last year to investigate, confident it would show up nothing. On Wednesday, he took to Morning Report to express that confidence again, and slammed the Commissioner for suspending the contracts.
He has no legal right to interpose in that way because he has no evidence upon which to make that judgment. You see, you can't.
So you're saying what? But he said he's suspended them. So I mean, what are you saying that he can't?
No. Well, go back to him. Ask him. The issue that I'm quite clear about in terms of what I know and what I know of the law is you can't, on suspicion, cut somebody's throat or lunch or whatever we want to call it. Okay, we have been found guilty of nothing.
John Tamahiri admitted some census data had been photocopied. But the allegations the data was used by Te Pāti Māori in its electoral campaign, he says, are baseless.
I'm asserting to you this morning that never occurred. It's an allegation. So it's easy to throw stones, but you shouldn't be in glass houses when you do so. What I'm saying to you is we've weathered constant reviews, constant audits, and only one thing that has a common denominator is we're all Māori, practicing being Māori, but when you do that, there's this unnerving belief in non-Māori that we're crooked. No, that's just got to be nipped in the bud. Where's the evidence?
Manurewa Marae's chief executive, Helena Stevens, also rejected the allegations the data was misused, but conceded processes like handling completed census forms could and should have been better. Meanwhile, Te Pāti Māori's co-leader, Rawiri Waititi, silent throughout the process, came out on Wednesday to finally make a statement.
Kia ora tātou. I know what you fellas are going to ask. This is what I have to say, so listen very carefully. We are absolutely elated that the inquiry found no wrongdoings of Te Pāti Māori, of Manurewa Marae, of the Whānau Waiparere Trust and the Whānau Ora Commissioning Agency. This has been nothing more than a political hatch job, and that the strength of our Māori movement continues to grow, and this is why the hatch job has been done. We will be unapologetic about who we are and who we represent, and so we will continue to be that voice for our people.
Unapologetic, but unwilling to take questions. Labour, meanwhile, has one further axe to grind. Manurewa Marae was used as a polling station at the 2023 election. Its then chief executive, Takutai Tash Kemp, was standing for Te Pāti Māori, and she ended up winning the Tamaki Makaurau seat by just 42 votes, ousting Labour's Pini Henare, who had held the seat since 2014. Chris Hipkins says Labour wasn't happy the Marae was a polling station before the election, and nothing that's happened since then has convinced him it was okay.
You know, when you've got 42 votes and you've got a series of decisions, this being only the latest, which draw into question the integrity of the electoral process, I think it is fair to conclude that it was an unfair result. The Labour Party raised concerns about Manurewa Marae being used as a polling booth. You know, there were polling booths there where Māori Party had a very prominent presence at the polling booth, and yet the Electoral Commission still allowed that polling booth to go ahead. I mean, I think that was a mistake as well.
Yeah, well, as you say, they looked into that. They came back and there were other marae around the country used for polling booths and they thought it was appropriate. So they've looked into those concerns, haven't they?
I'm not sure there are any other marae where the chief executive of the marae was a political candidate, where people were going to be voting whether or not to elect them at that marae. I think that's a pretty clear, bright line, and I think that I'm absolutely staggered the Electoral Commission didn't pick that up.
But as One News political editor Mikey Sherman found out, Takutai Tash Kemp is in no mood to talk.
You're a member of Parliament. People want to hear from you. What happened at Manurewa Marae?
Sorry, no comment.
What happened at Manurewa Marae? Was that appropriate to use it as a polling booth?
You can refer back to the party.
In December, the Electoral Commission acknowledged it failed to manage a perceived conflict of interest by using the marae as a polling booth. It's also reviewing its guidance for selecting polling stations so they meet community needs while also being politically neutral. The Commission, its policies and actions were not covered by this inquiry. Calls for a new inquiry have grown louder this week. The Justice Minister, Paul Goldsmith, says all options are on the table.
As a minister, I can send very clear directions, and the very clear direction is that they have to be exceedingly careful about public perception of independence or interference, and I think everybody can see that they got that wrong.
And taking another look at the Electoral Commission has cross-party support.
I've actually asked for a range of options and mechanisms because I want to respect the independence of the Electoral Commission, but I think there are genuine questions around policy and conduct to answer for. So at the moment we're just taking advice on what those mechanisms and what those options could be.
Context is everything. I think where a candidate as the chief executive of an organisation has a very strong presence within an organisation, using that as a polling booth really should ring some alarm bells for the Electoral Commission. 10 years from now, that might not be the case.
They have to set up polling places, and those polling places should be a safe place for New Zealanders to exercise their democratic right with not even the perception of any kind of misdoing. It seems in this case that may not be what happened, and yes, I think that there should be investigations.
I think whatever it takes for people to trust that our systems are in good hands, and that's why we welcome an investigation.
Should the Electoral Commission be investigated over how it handled the Manurewa Marae situation?
Most certainly.
It's now over to the Police and Privacy Commissioner to find out if the data collected at Manurewa Marae was misused. But for Stats NZ, the damage is already done. Public trust in the public service has taken a hit. There are now huge expectations on it to win that trust back. That was Focus on Politics. I'm Giles Dexter. Thank you for joining us. Mā te wā.